Welcome to the Emblazers, the show for B2B Leaders Igniting Revenue. I'm your host, Amanda. I'm joined by my colleague, who sometimes we deem him as the Swiss watch of strategic selling, Tim Reister. It's so good to see you. I'm so bummed I was under the weather and I wasn't able to join you in the conversation you had with Rakhi. It's good to see you, though.
Yeah, and it's good to hear you. You were under the weather, and you had no voice.
I know, I'm sure you
And
missed it.
so the job fell to me to do the interviewing. So I'm sure that I didn't hold up the entire fort, but the guest was so awesome that that'll carry the day.
You know what? You did a good job. I give you a solid B on that one. But I will tell you, after having a chance to listen to it, such incredible work that Rocky has done. And one of the things that really stood out to me is how she has developed a hiring process specifically to hire talent that isn't traditionally in the sales world. So some non-traditional talent. And I'm just curious, like, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I was really curious to hear that because there are more and more sales degree programs producing bachelored salespeople, and here she's saying, maybe I want some teachers, maybe I want this or that. I particularly agree in some level that I think journalists make, or at least journalists trained people make good salespeople. They ask good
Hmm.
questions. They're
Yep.
generally curious. They quickly learn a myriad of subjects and synthesize that, play it back, hopefully in a way that's interesting to the audience. So I'm kind of pro journalism skill set. Also, there's a lot of media people out there probably looking for work, and they're used to getting paid very little. So, maybe you should consider them.
Check, check, check. There you go. So I'm so excited for our listeners to learn more from Rakhi Voria. She comes with a tremendous background. She's currently the Vice President of Global Development and Sales at Procore Technologies, where she leads a team of over 285 reps. And get this, she has taken that company from a $500 million company to a $1 billion annual reoccurring revenue company in just a matter of 3 years. That's incredible. Prior to that, she was at Microsoft and IBM, where she built and scaled massive digital sales teams around the globe. And if she hasn't been busy enough doing all of that, she's a huge advocate for women in sales and currently oversees the Women Employee Resource Group at Procore. Keep listening on. You will be very excited to hear what Rocky has to say.
I'm so excited about today's show and our guest, Rakhi Voria, who's the global head of sales development for Procore Technologies, a construction software management firm. But the most important thing is her leadership in the area of digital sales. And I think you're going to hear and learn a lot today. The reason Rocky's here in the first place is I was asked to moderate a panel in New York. And it turned out the panel was a panel of one. It was Rakhi. And so she is a force. She's a panel of one. So today, welcome, Rakhi. You're a panel of one today. I was so excited once we said we're going to launch a podcast. I'm like, I want you on this show.
Well, hello. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Well, you have amazing credentials. You don't seem old enough to have all of this experience and success. So you need to talk to us a little bit about the work you've done, kind of as a digital sales leader native at places like Microsoft, IBM, and now Procore as a progressive career and business impact at all of these organizations. So maybe help our audience know what you've seen and what you've done.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I currently lead the global sales development and inside sales rep function at Procore. As you mentioned, Procore is a vertical SaaS company. We're helping to digitize the construction industry. I've been here for about 3 years. And prior to that, as you said, I was at Microsoft and IBM. So at Microsoft, I had helped them to build a brand new digital sales team. I was the fourth employee on that team, and we hired about 2,000 people in 3 years. So it was really, really massive growth. And then after that, I had the opportunity to go to IBM, where I was leading a global digital sales function as well. And so I am very passionate about building and scaling high performing sales organizations. I've done it across 3 tech companies now. And I think a big part of that is having the right infrastructure, tech stack, and talent in place in order to really stay competitive and differentiate yourself. So excited to be here today and talk things all things tech today.
So those are the credentials I'm talking about. And you really gave us kind of an agenda for today. And really, the purpose of the Emblazers podcast is to reach the wide range of sales leaders, some of whom weren't born on the digital side, but COVID made them digital inside salespeople. So we're all sort of digital inside salespeople. But you kind of got there first, and you kind of pioneered this. What have you seen evolve? Tell me how this has evolved in the last, let's say, 5 years, as we went into COVID, exited COVID, and now this is what selling looks like. So talk to me about what you've seen in that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is everybody's a digital seller in some way, shape, or form, as you mentioned now. I mean, COVID kind of changed their trajectory and really helped drive the shift from that. But I think the single biggest shift that I've seen is kind of moving more from just relationship driven selling to more insight driven selling. And that's where the digital piece comes in, because I think, several years ago, you could have a strong network, you could have really great building skills. I mean, all of that could sometimes be enough to win sales. But today, I mean, your customers are expecting much, much more. They want you to be trusted advisors. They want you to have, data driven insights and provide tangible value to their business challenges. And so, I think about obviously my time at Procore, we really leverage data to tailor our conversations with our customers in construction rather than just solely focusing on the product. It's all about, analyzing market trends and project timelines and understanding their operational inefficiencies. And that's what helps us kind of position our solutions and build trust and really position ourselves as partners. So I think that's kind of the name of the game when it comes to digital. It's really leveraging those insights and meeting customers where they are, engaging with them at the right time with the right insights that really help propel their businesses forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big shift in what is expected in terms of how a salesperson adds some value, right, to the customers or prospects that they're talking to. How are teams, how are talent? You're big into that. I know that's like one of your sort of pet issues is team development, talent development. How is that changing to meet the new demands in terms of the value that must be added in this environment as you just described it?
Yeah, I mean, I think talent development is changing pretty rapidly. I mean, back in the day, a lot of people would hire people who had the skill set that they needed to be successful on day one. But my motto has always been kind of hire for the future. It's okay if the person doesn't necessarily have all of the skills and competencies to be a seller today. And so I think, I mentioned I've hired thousands of sellers over the years, and my philosophy has kind of been around hiring for more of that raw potential versus just relying on some of those proven performers. And part of that is partially because of my own personal journey into sales. I was not targeting sales. I kind of fell into it myself. I think a lot of people and a lot of women and diverse candidates in particular tend to sort of fall into sales, but I've made an entire career out of it. I realized that I loved it. And I think part of it is also beyond my own personal journey is I've just found that some of the best hires that I've ever made in sales have come from very non-traditional places like military, teachers, hospitality, retail employees. I think a lot of those non-traditional personas have incredible examples of things like resilience and curiosity and just this natural ability to connect with people. So with the right training and the right coaching and environment, I think anybody can be wildly successful in sales. And so I really think that companies will win if they kind of break out of the mold and really evolve their talent strategy to be more intentional about finding some of those non-traditional personas.
I mean, that's really eye-opening in that as sales is evolving, it isn't like you're, hey, I'm going to evolve experienced sellers to become this. You're like, maybe I should look for people who haven't sold and I'm going to mold and form them. How do you assess that? How do you know you're getting that? You mentioned some of those raw skills, the just the tenacity and the relationship building and those things. But if they've never sold before and you can't look at like your quota achievement and things like that, how do you get to that essence to know like this is somebody I can work with?
For me, I just look for a strong track record of consistent success, and it doesn't have to be in tech or B2B sales. And so, if it was dance, if it was music, if it was sports, is it something that somebody did for a consistent period of time where they can demonstrate progress and the fact that they've been successful and have done well in that? So I think that's kind of the number one thing that I look for, but it is a bit of a gamble. I mean, sometimes you're sort of taking a risk on somebody, but I would say that more often than not, I've seen a lot of those non-traditional people end up being really successful. And I think some of the best teams are the ones where you bring kind of, the proven performers who have that B2B sales experience and the non-proven performers together. Because I think sometimes the proven performers, I mean, they obviously bring that experience and track record of success, but I found that sometimes they can be a little set in their ways. And so when you bring in kind of this fresh perspective, people who do demonstrate that grit and adaptability and hunger to learn and curiosity, that is kind of the superpower of a sales team, is just sort of bringing all of those together under one roof.
Well, there you go. I'm going to text my musical theater major daughter right now and and tell her Rocky's got a job.
Yeah.
She's graduating from my healthcare this year, so I might have to. So I think that's awesome. And what for me, then the question becomes, what does that look like in terms of then the training and the development and the onboarding? Like what skills? And then this question is kind of asked coming from two different areas. Like some things AI is just going to do. And
Yep.
so now you need certain skills that you really need to focus on, even with the experienced sellers. Like, what are those first skills you train for? What are those first capabilities you're looking to develop?
Yeah, I think the main thing, first of all, the way we've structured our onboarding program is the first week is everybody comes in and they learn about Procore and they learn about construction. Because more often than not, myself included, you're hiring a lot of people who don't necessarily have resident experience in the industry. So that's kind of a great boot camp, deep dive into understanding the company, the buyer personas, what it is that we're trying to do, and being a really mission driven company. It's really week 2 that we kind of go into the sales boot camp. And that's kind of more of your, tools, tech stack, objection handling, understanding the talk tracks, things like that. And then week 3 is when we really get, SDR, ISR specific or role specific, depending on which team you're on. And that's where you're kind of learning the actual day to day scripts and getting on the phones and everything. So I like to have my team get on the phones on day 6. Basically, we give them a week of kind of that intense training. And then on day 6, you just kind of try it. You're sitting side by side with a coach or a manager, and they're giving you real time feedback. But I think that's kind of the way we've approached it. It's basically kind of a 3-week onboarding program. And then beyond that, of course, you need to have kind of the evolving sales training and everything. But I think, breaking it up in that way has been really helpful for us. And doing a lot of role playing is kind of the best way to kind of get reps up and on the phones as quickly as possible.
Oh, I can imagine. And you know what? That's the best place to learn is to bump into a few things here and there and experience it. There's only so much you can kind of pregame, I guess. So makes a ton of sense. So let's talk about scaling that. Let's just talk about the world right now in terms of where people are working. Even I'm really curious. Procore has scaled tremendously in the last few years. I think what half a billion to $1 billion in 3 years,
Yeah.
something like that. So you've been obviously recruiting, hiring, scaling. So tell me about that process, and then talk to me about where are these people working? Because so much of what I'm reading right now is, are we coming back to the office? This is an inside sales job. What's your philosophy? I ask a lot of questions there. So maybe tell me about how you're scaling and then deploying this team.
Sure. I think scaling at the pace Procore has, and as you said, doubling in ARR in the past 3 years alone, has really required kind of relentless focus on maintaining a very high hiring bar, frankly. My team generates over half of the company's pipeline. And so with that comes this huge responsibility to kind of get our hires right. And it's tough because, frankly, I mean, we're under pressure to hire quickly, but at the same time, the quality of your team is a non negotiable. And so, obviously, a single bad hire can have a rippling effect on your team performance. And so, I think when it comes to scale, the things I really push my teams to do is, first of all, being crystal clear on what it is that we're actually looking for. And the second is really leaning on a very structured, data driven hiring process, frankly. And so I think you need to have a level of consistency so that you can kind of move candidates through quickly. I mean, at any given point, we're actually getting thousands of people applying for some of our open roles, to the point where we've developed a digital sales academy and community where, for all of the people who we want to hire but we don't have slots for, we put them through this nurture campaign where they can still be part of our talent community. We keep them excited about Procore. We give them more things they can work on maybe before they get an offer, so we can kind of keep them in that candidate process and maybe not lose them in this competitive environment that we're in. But also don't have all the spots to kind of to hire people all the time. So um, I think when it comes to scale, I mean, I think that's the most important thing is being super critical and clear with your talent acquisition teams on what it is that you're looking for and having a very clear process that you can kind of operate as a machine to be able to move quickly. And then to answer your question, I think it was around basically the rise of remote and hybrid work. Is that right?
So, woof, that's a lot. I love the idea of a nurturing campaign for high quality candidates to keep them warm, so that maybe there's a spigot you can turn on when you need it. That's amazing. So that scaling piece is super interesting. Thank you for that. What about that second half of the question then? Where are you at in terms of location, and how do you manage an inside sales team, and how do you deploy them?
It actually varies on the role across Procore. So for my team in particular, I feel strongly that for an SDR team that you need to be in person. And so we have a hybrid approach for that organization. It's not 5 days a week. It's anywhere between 3 or 4 days a week, depending on if you're on a performance plan or new or need some additional support. But generally, we like to have the teams come in pretty regularly to be in person because I think, especially if you're hiring people who don't have that sales background and experience, there's so much value in learning from osmosis, being able to turn around, ask a question, and really be able to accelerate your learning and development by being side by side with your peers. That being said, I mean, the world is changing and candidates want flexibility and things. And so for our inside sales rep teams, for example, we offer more flexibility than we do for the sales development teams. And so I think, depending on the role, the more you graduate into new opportunities and get promoted into other parts of, the company, including AE roles, that's where you become fully remote. So I think overall, like the rise of remote and hybrid work, it's been a challenge and an opportunity because I think on the one hand, hiring remotely, it's obviously really expanded our talent pool. You're not just limited to certain candidates that are in hubs or locations, which has been a game changer for being able to attract certain candidates. But on the other hand, I think assessing cultural fit and building team cohesion in a remote environment requires a lot of extra and intentional effort. So that's where things like in-person sales kickoffs and revenue trainings and things like that are really powerful to kind of supplement that remote environment. So to answer your question, I mean, it kind of varies across the different stack of roles across Procore, but generally in my organization, we do have that hybrid approach, and it's really worked well for us.
Any hub cities or locations particularly serving you well for both talent and effectiveness?
Yeah, so my team is actually based in Santa Barbara, where we're headquartered, Austin, Tampa, Toronto, Dublin, London, Dubai, and Sydney. So a lot of places around the globe, but fortunately, very, very fun cities too. And I've had the opportunity to actually open a couple of offices or help be part of that journey as well, which has been great. I think overall, all of them have been successful talent hiring strategy locations for us. Tampa, in particular, is one that I'm super excited about. It's kind of an East Coast untapped market, but is continuing to grow from a tech hub perspective. And so we're seeing a lot of great people who have sales experience and a lot of great people who don't have sales experience. And there's also a lot of diversity there and great universities and organizations that you can tap into. So Tampa's been great for us. Dublin is one of the ones that I've helped kind of spearhead opening over the past several years. And I think that one's also been great because it allows for, a lot of diversity in terms of language and being able to support the European market. But at the same time, frankly, it's a very competitive market and that a lot of tech companies already have hubs out there. And so I think there's pros and cons to each. You have to really be intentional about just sort of building that brand recognition because I think about our early days in Tampa where it was really hard. Nobody had ever heard of Procore. And so I went out there many times. We hosted a number of recruiting events. We went to universities. We got our name out there, sponsored events. And I think that's kind of really what it takes if you want to start in a new place.
Makes sense. And you're a construction software management company. A lot of construction going on in Florida. So at least at some point they recognize the domain that you serve. Appreciate that. So thanks.
Join hundreds of B2B revenue leaders at Emblaze Revenue Summit 2025, powered by Corporate Visions in Denver, April 15th through 17th. Connect with top CROs, gain exclusive insights, and get buyer-centric playbooks from experts and peers. Reignite your sales leadership with evidence-based approaches you can start using the next day. Will we see you at the Ultimate Conference for Revenue Leaders? Visit cbi.to/summit to secure your spot at Emblaze Revenue Summit 2025.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this, because born in digital, SDR, inside sales means tech. And there's so much has happened in tech. There's been a proliferation, and then there's some consolidation. Like, where are you at on the tech stack? What's working? What's not working? What are you betting on? What are you maybe cutting back on? Because this audience is, I'm sure, very curious on what you've been leveraging and what you find really useful.
Well, scaling quickly, especially in a hybrid or a remote environment, definitely requires a strong and evolving sales tech stack. So it's been interesting to see in my 3 years here just how much things have changed. But I think, our sales tech stack is a pretty critical enabler of productivity and scalability for sure. I mean, it allows you to kind of maintain those high standards and give reps the tools that they need to succeed so that they can actually spend more of their time building relationships and closing deals rather than getting bogged down by some of our internal processes. So for me, I mean, I think, there's a few things that come to mind. Call recording software is really critical and powerful when it comes to an inside sales team. It's our way of seeing what's working, what's not, providing coaching, looking at those data-driven analytics to help us kind of personalize that outreach and make sure it's getting better and better. So we recently moved to Gong, and we consolidated a number of our tech stacks to kind of allow for that. And that has been a journey, honestly, kind of getting the whole company moved over to a new platform. But it's also been a good opportunity for us to just kind of reignite and excite sellers about the capabilities. And then other tools like CRM platforms, I mean, sales engagement software like Outreach or AI-driven analytics and things. I mean, that's what's really helping us to personalize a lot of that outreach and identify those top opportunities, track performance and metrics at scale. And then I think the last thing that comes to mind, one that I've been most excited about and have helped spearhead a few years ago, is we adopted something called Ambition. And so that's basically a way for us to kind of have consistent coaching at scale and consistent recognition processes across the globe. So basically, Ambition helps track a lot of our performance management. It helps track all of our spiffs. It helps you do some really fun things globally where you can have contests across offices and things. So if you go into any of our offices and walk on the SDR floors, you will see big TVs that have Ambition on them, and you can kind of see how sales teams are stacking. If somebody closes a deal, their preferred song starts playing. Like, it's just a really fun way to drive excitement in the organization. But yeah, so I think that's kind of where we're at from a tech perspective. But I think it's just really important to be disciplined when it comes to the tech that we adopt, because it's really easy to get caught up in the latest tools, and you have somebody calling you every week, which can feel very overwhelming. And so we have to be really thoughtful about, is this really going to drive value, and does it align with your overall strategy, so that the tech stack can be a force multiplier versus just detracting because you're doing so many things at once.
And that tech stack makes a ton of sense, and I can see all the different spots and boxes you're checking. What are you seeing in terms of then the impact? Like, I've heard different companies say, I'm looking for 20 to 30% lift in productivity because these jobs are now being done by tech. Is that something you've measured, or what is that? What's meaningful to you in that area of measuring your tech impact?
I don't know if I look at it in that clear of a way, to be honest. But I think that, yeah, I mean, of course, we have to make sure that we're getting the ROI from our tech. And so what I'm looking at is, hey, like, is my team hitting their number, and what percentage of my team is hitting their number? Because it doesn't matter if I'm hitting my number if only 40% of the team got there. And so, different companies call it different things. Some call it breadth of participation. Some call it sales efficiency. And so I think that's the tough thing about tech sometimes, is you can't necessarily have a super clear correlation where, okay, maybe you spent, a certain amount of money on Gong, and you did call recording and you did coaching. You can't necessarily always tie it to the numbers. But I do think it all goes really hand in hand. I mean, ultimately, I look at every Monday how many of my managers have been listening to call recordings. Have they gone in the tool and have they given feedback to their reps? If they haven't, I reach out to them personally and try to encourage them to do that, because we are making big investments in these tools. And so I think it's really important for leadership to be kind of monitoring the usage and adoption, because there have been plenty of technologies that I've adopted over the course of my career where you implement it and then nobody actually uses it. And so I think it really starts at the top by ensuring that the organization knows that it's something that's kind of being monitored, and why it's a win-win for them to be adopting this.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today, Rocky, but I think I would be remiss. It would be malpractice. I might even get a ticket from podcasters, lawyers, that if I don't ask about AI. So talk to me as being a purveyor of digital inside sales, as somebody who's leveraging tech stacks. Where are you currently applying AI in a way that you think is really meaningful and is having impact, and that our audience should be considering?
Well, first of all, I mean, AI is absolutely transforming sales in ways that even I couldn't have imagined years ago. I think it's no longer a nice to have, it's a need to have if you really want to be a high performing sales organization, because it just helps you work smarter, and not necessarily harder, which is great. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to avoid all of
The
these
dream,
repetitive
yeah.
tasks? Yes, exactly. So, I mean, I think at Procore, we've leveraged AI to coach and upskill our teams, as I mentioned. So, I mean, the tools that help to analyze sales calls and emails, I mean, that's really powerful. That allows us to provide feedback real time on things like tone or messaging or deal progress, and getting some of those insights on how to enhance your email outreach or your phone call scripts or whatever it might be. And I think not only obviously does that help accelerate people's development, but it also allows us to have consistency in our messaging, which I think is really critical, especially as you're in a high growth environment where you're moving to multi product go to market, and you have so many new things coming out at any given time, and have a globally distributed team. Like that's really powerful. So I think AI is, it's just an enabler. It's not necessarily a replacement yet. I do think over time, like maybe there will be certain functions, certain activities, maybe even certain roles, frankly, that are replaced as we see more and more AI enter the sales space. But for now, I mean, it can definitely handle a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to pattern recognition. And so the most powerful ways that you can use it is by kind of tapping into that data and applying it to your team as quickly as possible.
What about call prep, generative AI to get research and insights? You talked about how important being an expert and driving insights are. Is AI supporting that activity too?
Absolutely, for sure. I mean, it's interesting because when ChatGPT first was on the rise, my team was using that quite a bit. And I actually really appreciated that, because I think it's great that they have that curiosity and they're excited to kind of tap into things with their fingerprints. But at the same time, it is a little bit nervous because you're relying on things that might not necessarily be fully baked yet. And so that's why I was really excited to see kind of Procore develop its own AI internally. And so that's what we use now. That allows us to kind of control some of the messaging and the sources and things like that, where they're getting some of their information. But generally, huge supporter of just kind of tapping into all of those opportunities. And I think the faster your company can invest in its own bots and own versions of ChatGPT and things like that, the better off your reps will be, because they'll have the messaging that you want at their fingertips.
You touched on it, and I'm just curious as we go here. What's your prediction for the potential for an AI avatar that looks pretty human? I've been watching some stuff online, and it's amazing, because at some point these avatars are a little glitchy for sure, but you can ask it any question and it's immediately up to date with everything that your company does. It's got some expertise that stays fresh. It stays at the breath of it. Like
Yep.
something's coming. I feel it, but where do you think and when?
I mean, for all you know, Tim, I might not even be real today. I might not even be me here.
I haven't seen a glitch yet. I've been waiting for it, but that they're getting, yeah. Talk
No,
to
but
me. What do you
seriously,
think?
I think you're right. I mean, I love to follow all of this and kind of keep up with the latest tech. And I think I think it's going to be really powerful to see just kind of how things evolve over the next several years here. I mean, I even think about some of my day to day and where I spend my time being in a global leadership role. I record a lot of videos for my team. I'm flying across the world all the time. And I think there's a very, very near future where there's going to be the ability for somebody to see a video by quote unquote me, where it looks like me, sounds like me, has the same intonations, the same humor, but it's not actually me. And the amount of time saving that that could bring to my own life is actually very cool to think about. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot out there that we're going to see. I think the challenge is just obviously making sure that AI is implemented thoughtfully. It's not necessarily a magic bullet, but some of the things we've seen even in the past year alone have been really impressive. So I'm excited to see where things go.
Same here. And I think our audience is excited to hear it from you, the real you right now. Maybe we can do this in 70 languages with your digital twin in the near future, but they don't want to hear it from me. You are an exciting, fresh face on the scene of selling. You've been honored by multiple different groups for how impressive your career has been. I'm excited to be watching it. I'm sure it's going to go great places. But today, it's been very insightful and informative and a lot for our audience to learn from. So thank you, Rakhi. Appreciate the time. And everybody, take a listen to this one and share it with your leaders because there's a lot of practical advice. Thanks again, Rakhi.
Thanks for having me.
Tim, that was so incredible. I feel so motivated to just keep having a conversation and listening to Rakhi. One of the things that really just stood out to me was how they're leveraging technology for just-in-time recognition and her companies that she's worked with, understanding the importance to those small things really do make a big difference when you're talking about trying to drive success and culture in the workplace around these sales teams. What about you? What was your big hit?
Yeah, I mean, reinforcement and reinforcement. Like boot camps are great, but then how does this translate to the real world? And they're using call recordings in a really important and impressive way. She and all of her teams have been born in the digital environment, so she really has a keen sort of sense of what the tech stack can do for you, but in a meaningful way, not overkill. So I thought she was very realistic about it. But she's undoubtedly a rocket ship as a sales leader. All the great companies and all the great outcomes, we're going to be hearing a lot more from Rakhi in the future. And it's great, speaking of hearing from, it's great to hear from you again, Amanda. Sorry that you missed that recording. But everybody, never fear. The show's going to get better because Amanda's going to be back on the next one.
No pressure, Tim. Well, I'm excited to keep listening to or watching Rakhi's journey. She was just so incredibly motivating, especially just being a woman in sales myself. So, for our listeners, stay tuned for our upcoming episodes. Make sure that you are liking and subscribing wherever you're listening or watching this podcast. Thanks for joining us this time. We'll see you on a next episode of the Emblazers.